There are many things to consider while learning how to surf. One of the most important things is learning how to read a surf forecast. This is important because surf conditions can go from really bad to really good within an hour. And knowing how to read a surf forecast ensures that you'll avoid these bad conditions and spend all your time in the water with favorable surf conditions. Today we're going to go over the 4 things to look for in a surf forecast. These 4 things are swell direction, swell height and period, wind, and tide. If you know how to look at these things on a surf forecast, then you'll be able to just look online, see if the surf is good, and know if it's worth going to the beach or not. The first thing to look for is swell direction. Swell direction tells us which direction the swell is coming from. This is important because oftentimes there are land masses like peninsulas or islands off the coast that can block swells from coming in from certain directions. This is a diagram of Otter Rock, Oregon, and as you can see, there's a peninsula on the north side of the surf spot. This is important because if the swell is coming in from the northwest, it's going to get blocked by this peninsula and it won't hit the surf spot. So you could have a really great swell coming in, but if it's coming from the northwest, and you're planning on surfing at Otter Rock, then you're going to want to ignore this swell. So at Otter Rock, for example, you're going to want to look for swells coming directly from the west or from the southwest, because these will go all the way and hit your surf spot, and those are going to be the swells that you're going to be surfing. The next thing to look at is swell height and period. On a surf forecast, it'll tell you, for example, a swell is 6 feet at 13 seconds. 6 feet being the height from the trough to the crest, and 13 seconds being the time between 2 crests. Now, these measurements are taken by offshore buoys, so it doesn't necessarily mean that the wave, when it crashes at the beach, is going to be 6 feet high. In fact, that height is determined by both the swell height and period. Swell period directly correlates to how much energy that the swell has. So a swell with a long period, like 15 seconds or longer, has traveled from a long distance and has built up a lot of power and speed by the time it crashes at the beach. Whereas a swell with a short period, like 8 seconds or shorter, doesn't have a lot of energy and it's going to be pretty lifeless by the time it crashes at the beach. So the most important thing to look at when looking at swell height and period is first the period and then the swell height. After taking a look at the swell, you'll want to see what the wind is doing at your surf area. Wind can be placed into 2 different categories, offshore or onshore. Offshore wind is wind that comes from the land out to the sea, while onshore wind is wind that comes from the sea onto the land. The best surf conditions are when there's no wind at all, and if you have a lot of wind in any direction, that's bad too because it makes the water choppy and is actually unsafe. So if you have a little bit of wind, which is most likely the case, then you're going to want the wind to be offshore. An offshore wind blows against the face of the wave, causing it to build in height and curl over when it crashes, whereas an onshore wind blows against the back of the wave and causes it to curl too early and just crumble rather than turn into a nice tube like this. So when you're looking at the wind, you're going to either want no wind at all or a little bit of offshore wind. And if you have some onshore wind, that's not as good, especially if the wind is strong. The last thing to look at on a surf forecast is the tide. Now a tidal forecast will look similar to this diagram, which tells you when high tide will be and when low tide will be. Now every surf spot is better at a certain tidal position. For example, Otter Rock is best between mid and high tide. So we can see the surf will be best between 3 a.m. and about 8 a.m. And then it'll be good again between about 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. Now a lot of tidal diagrams will also tell you when the sun rises and sets. So we can see the sun rises at 7 a.m., which means we can forget about this good tidal shift, and we know that the best surfing for this particular day will be between 4 p.m. until sunset at 8 p.m. That is, if the swell is good and the wind is right. After learning about these 4 general factors, it will just take a few times out in the water to really figure out when the conditions will be best at your local surf break. The more time out in the water with more first-hand experience, the better you will be at predicting the conditions at your surf break.